Ready?
You ready?
Okay. Right now?
Yep.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It's a great morning. It's our morning. It's a Bridgewater morning. And Rose and I are here together to celebrate it. So today, whenever you're watching this morning, we okay?
Yep.
This morning or this afternoon or sometime, this is Tuesday, or sometime this week, we're discussing the Constitution. Because a couple of hundred years ago, this month, and on the 17th of September, this month, the Constitution was signed, by the delegates of Philadelphia. Now, 55 had showed up, and 39 signed it, and 16, 17, 18, whatever, went home. And I'll come back to that. And, the men who signed, Massachusetts sent 4 delegates to Philadelphia. And their job was, and I'll come back to this, their job was to amend, to improve the Articles of Confederation, not to write a brand new Constitution for the United States of America. In fact, we really were not yet the United States of America. This is our Constitution today, this morning, and it fits very nicely. Watch, please. It fits very nicely in my shirt pocket, doesn't it? And it's only been amended 26, 27 times. The Constitution of Massachusetts does not fit in my shirt pocket. It fits under my arm. And one of the reasons for the length of the Massachusetts Constitution is it was written by John Adams, the starchy John Adams. And John Adams didn't know when to lift his pen or to shut his mouth. He would go on and on and on in terms of writing, and on and on and on in expressing his opinion. So we have a Constitution, for the most part, written by John Adams, that only fits under my arm. This is the federal Constitution. It's the oldest Constitution in the world. It is the briefest, and as I said a moment ago, it fits right here nicely. The Constitution of the United States, and I'll come back to this as well, has a mission statement. Maybe I'll do it right now. I'll keep you hanging, has a mission statement. This library, any public building in the town of Bridgewater, any public building anyway, has a mission statement. What we are up about, what we plan to do, a beginning, a middle, and our goals. And the Constitution has a preamble. And let me share it with you now, right up front. If I can find it. It's 52 words. It's a run-on sentence. And I urge you to try to put a period in it. It does not lend itself to have a period in it. It'll lose its vitality. It'll lose its earnestness. And let me read it to you, and then we'll go back to the formation of the Constitutional Convention. We, the people of the United States, the people, this is a people's document. The first draft had we, the states, and that was cut out because this is not we, the states, and you'll find out why in a few minutes. It's we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. I like that phrase, a more perfect union. That's like taking your second vows of marriage. I'm not quite sure why people do that, but a more perfect union. So you're smiling at me. You've taken your vows twice?
No.
Are you going to do it soon?
No.
Once is enough, isn't it?
Once is enough.
You bet. A more perfect union. And here are the goals. I think there are 6 of them. Check me on this. Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. And here's the one I like. It's such a broad phrase. And secure the blessings of liberty. It's so romantic. And secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Rose and myself, Gary, We are the posterity, and ensure to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. This Constitution, not any others, but this Constitution. And they chose their words carefully. And I like the fact that Gouverneur Morris, who wrote this, Thomas Jefferson would have done just as well, but Jefferson wasn't around. Now, he was in France, representing the United States. If John Adams were at Philadelphia, he'd still be writing it. It'd be the size of a phone book, and I wouldn't even be able to put it under my arm. He wasn't there either. He was the minister to Great Britain. So let's begin at the beginning. That's always a good place to start. At the end of the American Revolution, which, as George Washington said, it was a miracle that we prevailed against Great Britain. George Washington retired, went back to Mount Vernon, and at 55 or 54, promised Martha Washington that he's done with public life. I'm done. I'm retired. We'll read to each other. We'll plant a garden. We'll talk to each other. I'm home. I've been gone for 7 years, and I'm home for good. My word to you, Mrs. Washington. And she believed him. Women are willing to believe, aren't they? She believed him. I'm home for good. That didn't last very long, because under the first Constitution, and it really is incorrect to talk about the Articles of Confederation as a failed Constitution, and I'm going to use the phrase articles, rather than constantly saying the Articles of Confederation. So I'll use the phrase articles. And if one looks at, the opening sentence of the Articles, it talks about a perpetual union among the states. And under the Articles, each state could send as many representatives as they wanted to Annapolis. That was the first capital, if you will. And in order to get any changes in the wording of the Articles, one needed the agreement of all 13 states. They couldn't agree on the day of the week. They couldn't agree on the time. And this was designed purposely to make sure that there were no frivolous amendments or changes under the Articles of Confederation. To get a measure passed, you needed 9 states to agree. So 9 out of 13, that's a prescription for disaster. To amend, to change the wording of the Articles, one needed all 13 states. They couldn't agree on anything, as I said. So here's a perpetual union. And it wasn't a failed Constitution. It wasn't a Constitution. It simply didn't work. And there were a number of difficulties under the Articles. And these difficulties surfaced quickly. One was this. You ready for this? This was a huge problem. There were 7 currencies floating around in the 13 states. That's 7. 7 currencies. And the value of each currency changed depending on whether or not you were using that currency in Connecticut, New York, or Massachusetts. And there was a problem with land holdings and buying furniture and buying clothing. You had 7 currencies floating around among 13 states. That was a huge financial problem. This really just disturbed Alexander Hamilton. We'll only talk a little bit about him, when his name surfaces in our Constitution. There was no army. So when settlers moved west, up and over the Appalachian Mountains, they were not greeted favorably by the Indian nations out there. So there was no army to protect these settlers. There was no navy to protect American trade, to protect American ships who were trying to, trade with Europe. Currency problems. Problems dealing with land borders. Where did North begin and South Carolina begin? Who owned the land, west of the Appalachian Mountains? Disputes over land ownership, disputes over trade, no army, no navy, problems financially. And it looked as if we've won the revolution, but we have failed in the peace. And there were certain moneyed interests, if you will, aristocratic interests in the various states that wanted to meet and firm up to strengthen the Articles. It was weak. And it was seen as being weak because we did not want a strong central government. That's what the rebellion was all about, if you will. We do not want another center of power as Britain and Parliament had been. So we are going to establish a weak central government, states' rights. States' rights. We have it today, if you will, with Texas and the abortion issue and the Supreme Court. I'll come back to some of that as well. So the agreement was, and this was led by Alexander Hamilton. Boy, he was a doer, a maker, and a shaker. That we need to meet and strengthen the Articles. And they agreed to meet in Philadelphia, where it all started. They didn't know this, but where it all started successfully, with the Declaration. And from that, as Washington said, a standing miracle that we prevailed over Great Britain. And we're going to meet in Philadelphia. Hear me well. We're going to meet in Philadelphia and improve, amend the Articles, strengthen them, particularly in the field of finance. We cannot have 7 currencies being exchanged among 13 states, if you know other states, not 13 colonies. So they met in Philadelphia, and one could send as many delegates as one wanted. Massachusetts sent 4, and I wrote them down because these names are not even remembered today. And these men would be upset to hear that. And their names are Rufus King. To imagine baptizing your child, I baptize you Rufus. Rufus King, Nathaniel Gorman, Elbridge Gerry. I know it was pronounced Gary back then. Elbridge Gerry, and Caleb Strong. 4 representatives from Massachusetts. 2 of them will sign the new Constitution, and 2 of them will not. They will return to Massachusetts for this reason. We are not supposed to write a new Constitution. We are here to amend, to strengthen the Articles. And that's why I said at the beginning, of the 55 delegates there, 39 will sign the new Constitution. 16 will go home, because we're not supposed to write a new Constitution. We are exceeding our instructions. It will be Mr. James Madison, brilliant, the first political scientist, if you will, who will represent Virginia, along with Monroe and Washington eventually. They had to persuade him to come to Philadelphia. It will be Madison who will present what will be the framework for a new Constitution. And it was called the Virginia Plan. And I can imagine this, can't you? Madison as a delegate showed up, and one by one they found their cards, where they were to sit and so forth, and the tables. If you haven't visited Philadelphia or Carpenter's Hall, it's a very small room. And they did good work in the long run. They did good work, and they all had their seating charts where they're supposed to sit. And as Madison said, each of you have a copy. He must have Xeroxed it. I made that up. A copy of the new Constitution that I am proposing here. As I said, he was brilliant. He was a political scientist, all 5'2" of them, all 5'3" of them. And they began to work on it. And the first objection, Mr. Madison, and 2 of those who objected were from Massachusetts. Mr. Madison, may I have the floor, sir? Indeed, we recognize Caleb Strong from Massachusetts. We are not here to write a new Constitution. We are here, we've been sent by our state or states to amend the Articles, to strengthen them, not put them through the shredder, and start all over again. The thought just came to me. Can you imagine writing a new Constitution for Afghanistan or Haiti, both of which are failed states as we speak this morning? That said, I'll leave that. We need a new Constitution. We cannot strengthen the Articles. They are too weak to begin with, and we need to start all over again. And many of the delegates left. We are here to amend the Articles, not to write a new system of government. And there was a big quarrel about this. You learned your history, I did. Anyway, I'm sure that most of you did as well. That everybody was well-mannered, at the Constitutional Convention. They all wear the same suit. They got it at Macy's. They all wore wingtip loafers, wingtip shoes, and they all sat quietly and debated quietly. That didn't happen. It was acrimonious. There was yelling, pounding on the table. And we're not here to do this. This is too strong. This was what the whole revolution was about, to get away from a strong central government, a parliament, a king. What are we doing here? We're shooting ourselves in the foot, in both feet. They didn't say that, I said that. And we're not supposed to do this. We need permission. And Madison, if we ask permission, the answer will be no. Don't answer your phones. Don't answer your cell phones. Don't respond to any email. The answer will be no. Come home, come home. We need to write a new constitution and, if you will, spring it on the people, spring it on the states. Hamilton was very much in agreement with this, and so was Benjamin Franklin. As I said, 16 or so of the delegates got up and walked out. This is not what we are supposed to do. We are exceeding our instructions. This is treason. This is the very thing we rebelled against. Madison, who chaired the Constitutional Convention. Now, what about George Washington, another Virginian? They all knew. All the Virginians knew we need Washington here, because the country knew that he would have no part of any behavior that jeopardized the victory over the British. We need to get him here. Not to chair anything, but at least to be present. The nation trusts him, and they knew that he would have no part of anything that would jeopardize the standing miracle against Great Britain. And he did not want to go. I'm old. I'm 55. I'm old. I'm tired. I promised my wife I'm home for good. Martha or Mrs. Washington. I'm not quite sure how they address one another. I'm here for good. To read poetry, to go for long walks, to plant a garden. And I'm tired. I'm old. In fact, I'm so old that I can barely get my arms up to straighten my wig. And back then, typically, there was a little spot of glue on the top of your head to keep the wig in place. And I can barely bend over to pull up my silk stockings. I'm not wearing my silk stockings today because I couldn't bend over to pull them up. Washington, I'm not going. I'm retired. And Madison and Monroe prevailed on him. Just be here. You don't have to say, anything. Come in and turn on the lights, put on the coffee, and make sure the Danish is fresh. And Washington said, see, they prevailed upon his sense of duty and honor and country. It is your duty for the country, and we will be honored by your presence. And eventually, okay, I'll be there, but I'm not going to say anything. Washington spoke only twice during the months of the Constitutional Convention. And by the way, it was sweltering in Philadelphia. They weren't wearing T-shirts and sandals. They were all buttoned up like we see in the photographs. Sweltering in Philadelphia. The weather we had a couple of weeks ago. And Washington will only speak twice. Once when he objected to limiting the size of our army to only 30,000 people. As Washington said, I will support that, 30,000, as long as you convince me that we'll never be attacked by an army larger than 30,000. So that was taken off the table. See, these men feared standing armies. They really feared standing armies. They were the source of intrigue, of tyranny, of losing our freedom. We the people. They hadn't written it yet. And the only other time he spoke is that how many delegates will be sent from each state based on population. The first proposal on the table was for every 40,000 citizens, one delegate will attend what became the new Congress. And Washington said that's too many, or that's too few. I should say, one delegate per 30,000 people. The only times he spoke, unless he was having dinner, but spoke publicly, it's in the record. And how do we know this? James Madison, and you can read the record today. James Madison kept a very astute and fair diary of positions of who spoke and what position they took. Okay, so let's go to the beginning. When they finally agreed, we need to get rid of the articles, but don't tell anyone. And Madison proposed, and they agreed to this, that if you take notes on what's going on, do not take them out of the room, for fear that people around Philadelphia will get wind of what we're doing, or other people around the states. If you take notes, keep them here and remain quiet about what's going on here, because what we are doing is exceeding our instructions, and we are not going to ask permission. That'll wrap everything up. All we're going to have is more trouble. We don't read that in our history books, do we? Again, it's as if everybody was calm, composed. They wore a three-piece suit. They had a cup of coffee. I don't see any coffee here. They had a bottle of water, and they had a little sandwich to eat. So the first order of business was to write up. There were 7 articles in the Constitution. You can read them tonight. They won't put you to sleep. They are the spine of our government. They're here. The spine of our government. 7 articles. I always tell my students, my men students, that if you're out on a date and you want to really make sure you get her attention, or anybody's attention, let's say her name is Anne or Rose, and say, look at what I'm carrying here. Watch carefully. I'm going to show you something. And I'll do it just like this. Say, here is the Constitution. And she will say, you carry the Constitution? Yes, I do, dear. And anytime the conversation slows, either between us or at a wake or a wedding, all I need to do is pull out the Constitution, and people will flock to your table. They'll knock over chairs. He's drafting. He's talking about the Constitution. And honey, whenever it gets slow in our relationship, watch this. We will talk about the Constitution together. And the guys all say, I think you've taken too much medicine this morning. And I'll say, no, I didn't take too much. I didn't take enough. The Constitution. Don't leave home without it. Sounds like a MasterCard proposal or an American Express card proposal. They're going to work on the House of Representatives. See, that would be the engine. The presidency would be in suborbit, and the Supreme Court, and boy, that was a last-minute decision. The Supreme Court also would be in a suborbit around the legislature. That would be the heartbeat of this new government. The presidency would execute the laws, and the Supreme Court, I'll come back to this, no one had any idea what that would do. Boy, has that role changed. So the Congress would write the legislation, and they would debate it, and the president, whomever that was, well, they all knew it was going to be Washington. He wanted no part of it, by the way. The president, whomever that would be, would simply execute the laws. He would not propose legislation. Things have changed, haven't they? He would execute the proposals or the laws agreed to by Congress. And Congress you had to be 30 years of age to run for the Congress. And by the way, you didn't run for office like we do today, but I'll use the word run. To run or be elected, and 30 years of age, and you had to be a member of the state that you ran from. You couldn't be like Britain, where you live in one borough and you could run for a seat in another borough. You had to live there, and you had to be 30 years of age, and you would be the heartbeat of this new government. The president, Article 2 of the Constitution, it has 7 articles. Article 2 of the Constitution would execute the laws. And they had a number of questions that they had to answer about the presidency. One would be, how long would he be elected for? And some said 7 years, and some recommended 6. 7 years without re-election. And they finally agreed on 4 with re-election, that one had to be an American citizen and one had to be 35 years of age. And those men who were working, by the way, it was all men, and those men who were working around that table knew that they were writing a job description for George Washington. He knew it, and he kept his head down. I told my wife I'd be home in a couple of weeks. We're already into July, and she's not happy, and I haven't telephoned her, and I told her I'd keep in touch, but I don't want to hear it. I'm going to stay here until we get the job done. 35 years of age, a citizen, and they gave the presidency, surprisingly so, a large grant of power. Read it. Because they knew Washington would accept the job, duty, honor, country. He would not fail them. And he knew they were going to come to him with the offer of the presidency. And by the way, you did not campaign like today. There were no signs on anyone's front lawn, no bumper stickers, no TV ads. There was no TV, of course. And you simply waited for the job to come to you, whether it was a senator, I'll get that in a minute, a House member, or the presidency. And they gave the office of the presidency a large grant of power because they knew Washington would not abuse it, that he would set a precedent, an example for others to follow. By the way, Washington was the first president to issue an executive order. It's not in the Constitution, but he issued an executive order. I better place this one here so I'm using the right booklet. He issued 8 executive orders. There's no power under Article 2 to issue an executive order, but he felt we need enabling legislation. Franklin Roosevelt issued 1,000, 2,000 executive orders. And of course we know that the issue of executive orders is still, very controversial today. So Washington gets a large grant of power, certain age, a certain term, 4 years, with unlimited re-election. When they talked about this, Benjamin Franklin, again, who never knew when to keep his mouth shut, Benjamin Franklin was carried into the Constitutional Convention like he was a pharaoh. Prisoners who were doing a month or 2 months in a local Philadelphia jails carried him in because he had swollen feet and he couldn't walk very well. But he could talk very well. And Franklin will propose that we have multiple presidents, one from the North, one from the South, and one from the mid-Atlantic states, to make certain that all sections of the country are representative. Now, can you imagine that today? 3 presidents, trying to resolve an issue, and all the chaos that would cause. Never mind the chaos we have today. Whatever. Or we have had and will have with President Biden. That's coming. And I know he's reading the tea leaves as I'm speaking about him. That we have a single president, as I said, with a large grant of power, because he will not, or she, would always be a he. By the way, I'm surprised in laying out the directives for the presidency that they didn't put down, that they didn't even say male or female. It was unimaginable that any woman would run for any office. This is man's work, and a woman's work was at home, and whatever details you want to put in there. No woman would ever run for an office, and you did not put a bumper sticker on your bumper or have a sign or campaign. It was unimaginable that anybody who campaigned for the office and said, choose me, choose me, choose me, that's a person who you don't want to choose. They want power, they want a chapter in a history book, and they want a nice salary. Washington did not accept a salary. In fact, the job didn't pay a salary until many, many years later. And the Supreme Court the third article of the 7 articles of the Constitution. No one knew what it was supposed to do, except if you read it, it's the shortest piece of the 3 articles dealing with the way the country would operate judiciously, politically. It's the shortest piece. They had no idea what the Supreme Court would do. Now today, the buck has been passed to the Supreme Court on issues the Senate or the House does not want to deal with. It might cost them re-election. Basically, they dealt with questions of admiralty. They dealt with maritime law or issues within the District of Columbia. And it's always surprised me, why the first capital was not in Philadelphia or in New York, where Washington took the oath of office. It wound up in Washington, D.C., which was a swamp. If we have time, we'll talk about that later. That was a deal cut by Hamilton to put it in a swamp to keep the people away from the seat of government. He feared another revolution, the French Revolution. If we put it in a swamp with crocodiles and bad weather and water that stank and one couldn't digest without getting sick to your stomach, that'll keep people away. And that leads me to this. Particularly if you served in Washington, D.C., you were known as a 1-pint guy or a 2-pint guy or a 3-pint guy because the water was undrinkable. So a 1-pint guy, maybe beer, maybe whiskey, a 2-pint guy, or a 3-pint guy. Madison was a 1-pint guy. And he said, I have to drink this 1 pint of whiskey a day to be a faithful husband to you and to live with you. Now, I don't know if she was a 1-pint or a 2-pint or a 3-pint woman, but the men were known 1 pint, 2 pint, 3 pint. That doesn't show up in the history books, does it? That's why you're sitting here listening to me or writing notes down, I hope. So the Supreme Court was an add-on. Hamilton liked this. He felt that somehow the Supreme Court could be turned into, over time, into a real engine, to govern the legislature. So what have we done? The term of office, age, and you must be an American citizen. I hope they never change that. We know that they've changed the terms, haven't we? That because Franklin Roosevelt went on and on and on, and the Republicans felt the only way they could get an opening was 2 terms and you're done. We don't need another Franklin Roosevelt. That came back to bite them, if you will. Eisenhower could have won a 3rd term easily, even though we didn't want it. He could have won a 3rd term. Now, in electing the president, how do we elect him? And Franklin proposed let the people elect the president. And around the room, the buzz was, the people, those people out there in the streets of Philadelphia, they don't know anything. They'll vote for the person who promises them the most. They don't know anything. They don't know the national problems around the country. They know nothing. They're I don't want to say the scum of the earth. I just said it, didn't I? They know nothing. So how do we elect them? And they came up with this clumsy, we still have it today, this clumsy Electoral College, didn't we? Which is a combination of the number of senators. Each state has 2. And you have to be 30 years of age. That each state has 2. And you add that to the number of House members that you have. And that is your electoral vote. And it's a clumsy way to do business. And I wish they would abolish the Electoral College. It won't happen anytime soon. And they would abolish it through the amendment procedure. I'll come back to that as well. Washington, when he went to New York to deliver his first inaugural address, and there's no language in the Constitution which demands that the president issue an inaugural address. Washington felt, as the first president, speaking from New York, I need to tell the people that are here, what to expect. And when he went to the inaugural, he rode by horse, and people cheered and cheered and cheered. Washington, Washington, Washington. the great Washington. That's why Hamilton proposed that he be on the dollar bill, by the way, not on the 10. I'm on the 10. You've got the dollar bill. And they cheered him and they celebrated him. And when he crossed the East River to get to where he was delivered the inaugural, the band, if you will, or the group, that was on the ship, said, this event needs a tune. And the guy who was the orchestra leader, fumbling around in his playbook, here's what we're going to play, Hail to the Chief. And Washington, hearing Hail to the Chief. I'm not a chief. That sounds like a monarchical song. Hail to the Chief. That disturbed him. And in that first inaugural, and read it, it's not short. The second inaugural is only 200 words. He could hardly wait to get out and get home. I think that's true of many presidents. Read that first inaugural, because you'll find, at least I found it, in the first sentence, in the very first paragraph, he said, I don't want this job. I don't want to be here. And I can imagine people saying, what? I don't want this job? I don't want to be here? But he got sworn in, and the language for the swearing in is here. And we know that Justice Roberts flubbed it when he inaugurated Barack Obama, didn't he? He thought he had memorized it, he'd be really cool. He flubbed it, and Barack Obama had to be sworn in again in the Oval Office. They both found, Barack Obama found it humorous that Justice Roberts flubbed the language of the inaugural. All right, that said, Washington delivers his inaugural address. The second one is barely 200 words. It's the shortest inaugural address in American history. Now, hang with me on this one. They had worked in secret. No notes were taken out of the room. No interviews were given. And Benjamin Franklin, it was made clear to Franklin by Madison, keep your mouth shut. You're a big mouth. You're always looking for an opportunity to deliver a speech or to make comments. You in particular, Dr. Franklin, keep your mouth shut. We are working in secret, and what we need to do is we need to present to the people a finished document. A document, and this is why I open with this, that has a mission statement. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. Under the Articles, it was not a more perfect union. This is why people have a second marriage or take their vows again. Can you believe that? I can't. Once is enough. A more perfect union. And I read it to you. And for ourselves and our posterity, we the people, not we the states. By the way, Hamilton was on that committee that drafted the preamble. It's 52 words. It's a run-on sentence. It is. And I don't urge you. Try to break that into two sentences. You cannot do it. It loses its vigor, its vitality, its sense of purpose. It's one run-on sentence, 52 words, but you cannot break it. As I said, it loses its vitality. So now that we're all through here, and the 39 who remained in their seats signed off on the new Constitution. Are you watching the time for me? I'll check it. Signed off on the, we got plenty of time.
Plenty.
Nobody wore a wristwatch back then. They all had pocket watches. Wristwatches came into play during World War I. I'm drifting a little bit into World War I, so that everybody was synchronized as to when the bombardment was to begin or the charge. It was considered too feminine to wear a wrist watch. We're done. We've signed it. Washington was the first one to sign it. And two of the delegates from Massachusetts signed it. Rufus King and Nathaniel Gorman. The other two refused to sign it. We're not supposed to do this. We're going home. We're not going to rat you out, but we're not supposed to do what we've just done. And I'm not going to sign it. Let me give you those names again. Caleb Strong and Elbridge Gary did not sign it. Rufus King and Nathaniel Gorman signed it. They adjourned. They adjourned to have a breakup dinner. They were still on the payroll of the states that sent them. And Franklin said, I know all of the restaurants in Philadelphia. I know all the maitre d's. Let me pick out the restaurant, and also a restaurant that has a fine wine list. That goes back to 1 pint, 2 pint, 3 pints. It could be wine, it could be beer, it could be whiskey. You know, Washington was a distiller of whiskey, by the way. Made a good buck on it. He didn't get paid, so he had to make a buck somehow. But he's not on the dollar bill yet. It was the City Tavern. They had dinner, and they had bottles of wine at the City Tavern. And the reason for the breakup meeting was, no one knows we've done this. How do we sell it to the American people? How do we sell it to the state legislatures that are going to ratify it? And we need 9 states to ratify, and for this to become the new law of the land. What arguments are we going to make? And Washington, who was there, said, you think you've got trouble in coming up with arguments to accept this new Constitution? I have to go home and tell my wife that I'm accepting the presidency, that I'm not retired, and she is not going to be happy about this. Now, can you imagine him? The good news? I've got good news and bad news. What's the good news, George? What's the good news, Mr. Washington? I'm home, honey, and I've missed you. And I know I did not write to you or email you or phone you. I know that. And I'm sorry. We were so busy, dear. But what's the bad news? You know, when anybody opens with I've got good news and bad news, I always want the bad news first. I want to give me the bad news first so you can sweet talk me with the good news. What's the bad news? Well, the bad news is I've accepted the presidency. You've done what? Can't you see her folding her arms and stomp away? You've done what? I've accepted the presidency. Is there more bad news? Yes. We have to move to New York. New York? It snows in New York. Where is New York? You will love the theater. You will love the shopping. You'll love New York, the city that never sleeps. Have you heard that new tune by Frank Sinatra? I don't want to hear that. We have to move. Now, I've read in a couple of sources that she did not attend his inaugural. Now, can you imagine a wife of a newly elected president not attending my husband's inaugural? That would be more news than the inaugural. I think it was because of weather and traveling conditions. But nonetheless, you know, regardless, she was not there. And as I said, the inaugural address beginning with, I don't even want this job. How long? 4 years? I might as well mention this now while it occurred to me. He wanted to go home at the end of 4 years. But Jefferson and Hamilton prevailed upon him. Take 4 more years. The only one we all trust. And he accepted it. And then both Hamilton and Jefferson, I should say, Hamilton and Jefferson resigned. He said, resign? You persuaded me to accept 4 more years. That did not make him happy. Washington. So we need to sell this to the conventions in each state to ratify the Constitution. And when we get 9, it's the new, when we get 9, it's the new law of the land. And from that came the Federalist Papers. Now, you may not have heard of, have you ever heard of the Federalist Papers? Okay. A for the day.
Oh, good.
Okay. You've heard, now the Federalist Papers, and don't read them. They're really laborious. I haven't read them all. I've sampled a few of them. It'll take you forever. Unless you're traveling to China, you'll have time to read the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were a series of 85 essays. It's like a how to do it series. Why we wrote the Constitution and why each section of the Constitution will be addressed by certain essays in the Federalist Papers. There were 85 essays, most of which were written by Hamilton, and some were written by John Jay and by Madison. Most of them were written by Hamilton. And all you need to do to get a sense of it is to read the first paragraph of the first essay in the Federalist Papers written by Alexander Hamilton. He wanted to be the leadoff hitter. That's Hamilton. I want to be the center of attention, and he was. It's going to get him shot later on by Aaron Burr for lots of reasons. I want to write the first one. I want to be the leadoff hitter. And I want the people to read my essay first. And if you read that essay, just read the first, that's 3, just read the first paragraph. Hamilton lays it out and then continues on why we did what we did. And he acknowledges that we had no authority. But then he added a but. But. We exceeded our authority without permission to be able to achieve a new powerful central government. 85, I should have brought a copy, 85 essays. The Federalist paper you got to carry around in a knapsack. Just read the first chapter of it and you'll get a sense of where Hamilton is coming from. Now, the first state to ratify the Constitution was Delaware. Massachusetts, there was a huge battle in Massachusetts. Massachusetts was number 7, number 8. The big battle, the tremendous battle, was in Virginia. Virginia, the home of Washington, Madison, Monroe, Randolph. A huge battle. And that battle was over the fact as the delegates in the Virginia ratifying convention flipped through it. Where are the Bill of Rights of the people? You have the presidency laid out. You have the legislature laid out. You have the Supreme Court laid out. Where are the rights of the people? Madison was there, not Madison. Yeah, Madison was there. And he got hammered on this. And Madison made the case, and I'll be brief here, that we thought about writing down about having the rights of the people. But he said the reason we did not do that is we did not believe we had the right to do that. You know, what are the rights of the people? Who are we to give you rights? You are born with these rights. They are natural rights. And if we list them, does that imply that these are the only rights we have? And if we list them, does that suggest that they can be taken away by the Congress or this new government? And we thought about it, but we said no, no, no. But, you know, this was Madison. If the delegates here at the Virginia delegation wish the rights to be written, the first order of business of this new Constitution will be to list the rights of the people. And that will become, later on, give or take a few words, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Madison lived up to his word. And people in Virginia, some folks in Virginia, hoped that he would not be elected to this new Congress, either as a senator or a member of the House, so that he could not fulfill the promise that if Virginia ratifies, I'll see it to the rights of the people are listed. Well, he was elected to the House of Representatives, and they were, after great debate, listed. And that first list was 13, and then it was chopped down to 10, and finally comes to us as the first 10 amendments. And by the way, they knew that their work wasn't finished. We need to have a vehicle to expand the Constitution if we need to. And that's where the language came from, to be able to amend the Constitution. And we have, 26 or 27 amendments to the Constitution. The last time the Constitution was amended was in 1992. And I'll be brief here, which was when Clinton was president. And the last time the Constitution was amended simply said that a present Congress, you ready for this? That a sitting Congress may not vote itself a pay raise, but the next Congress coming in may. And you know that most people, men and women, get reelected, don't they? So in effect, what they were saying, we are voting ourselves a pay raise, but it takes the next Congress to vote ourselves a pay raise, and most people are reelected. They also knew, and this comes up from time to time, they also knew that the first man we elect will be a good one. That's Franklin. The first man we elect will be a good one. I'm quoting him here directly. I was there. Let me say it again. The first man we elect will be a good one. Who knows what may come afterwards? And in order to protect the country against a tyrant, a dictator, a man who was not fit to be president, we have the impeachment language, that we may impeach a president for high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, treason and high crimes and misdemeanors, they knew what treason was. They'd all committed treason in rebelling against the king. They knew what treason was. They knew what a misdemeanor was. A high crime? A high crime is today. A high crime is whatever the press says it is. The high crime is what people think it is. But they added in those weasel words, high crime, because we do not know what a high crime might be over time. Treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanors and high crimes. They had impeachment language, and they knew that they needed it because in Great Britain, they added impeachment. By the way, Britain does not have a written constitution. They just have a series of agreements. The delegates at Philadelphia wanted a written constitution. We can go back to it and back to it and back to it. That's why I said if a conversation gets dull when you're dating, or you're at a wake and nothing's going on, or a wedding, bring out the Constitution and people will tip over chairs and tables to get to your table. That's the hot table. You're talking about the Constitution. And here's a copy. And by the way, you can get this in Quincy, at the downtown Quincy, at the whatever that building is. It costs $1. $1. Here. It makes a great gift. It's better than giving someone a carton of cigarettes, and much more healthy. So I urge you all to read parts of it, for your nighttime reading, and read it to your partner. And you can trade it back and forth. It's better than reading a novel. It's the law of the land, and it stands almost 300 years later with only, let me double check that. Is it 26 or 27? Five, 26 amendments. If you have a chance, just cross my eyes, Amendment 25. This is another way to remove a president, the 25th Amendment. Every once in a while it pops up, to remove a president. And the process of removal would begin with, and you can read this, would begin with the vice president, who would gather the members of the cabinet together, and they would talk about, do we want to write a letter to remove the president? Read the 25th Amendment. It got on the books right after the Kennedy assassination. And it dealt with if Kennedy were so incapacitated by the bullet that he could not serve in any capacity as president, that we need to remove him and move up the vice president. Read the 25th Amendment. And when you can figure it out, you explain it to me. Excuse me. It is full of checks and balances. Madison would be so proud. And one of the assignments that I like to give is to identify 3 or 4 examples of Madison's work providing or work and suggestions in providing checks and balances. Read the 25th Amendment. It is the longest amendment in the Constitution. Almost 2 full pages. Now that'll give you something to do. And when you figure it out, explain it to me. But you can go right through it. Check, balance, check, balance, check, check, balance. That's your homework, Rose.
Okay.
Read the 25th Amendment. And then explain it to your husband.
Oh.
Or say to your husband, hey, cuddle up. I want to read to you the 25th Amendment. And he'll want to know what you've been drinking tonight.
Yeah, right.
And how many.
Pints.
Read it. And then figure it out. And then explain it to me. So unless you have any questions, and you don't because we're on Zoom, I'm going to wrap it up. And it's a great document. It's we the people, not we the states. A great document, a couple of thousand words, and it labors from time to time. It does. And it stumbles from time to time. But it still works so many decades later. Right here. See you later. Thank you for your company, and be well.